Hey, I'm Derek Manky with FortiGuard Labs. I'm joined today with Anthony G and Domenico, aka Tony G. It's good to see you again, buddy. How you doing?
All right, it's great, man. It's great to be here, and always good to see you too.
Yeah, I know in this new normal virtual world, we have at least we can see more of each other on screen. Hey, thanks for joining me. So, in some of these past episodes we've done with FortiGuard Labs, I've been talking with some other co-hosts and colleagues, obviously within the lab. So on various topics, right? We've talked about healthcare threats. We've talked about the threat of this new normal of telework now. The whole concept of the threat environment changing, right? From people working remotely, having to do segmentation locally on networks that they didn't have to do before. Obviously, I've talked about some of the statistics. You know these well, Tony. In the labs, we've seen a big uptick, obviously, on things like COVID-19. Phishing scams are pulling anywhere from 40 to 60 of these per day. They're very targeted in nature, obviously, trying to, as usual, social engineer on the latest flavor of fear. We're going kind of back to this uptick in viruses now too, right? There used to be a lot of just phishing links and training on education to that. We saw a rise of about 131% in viruses alone in March. And a lot of those were attributed to these social engineering lures, right? So we're seeing a lot more of malicious, PDF, office documents targeting things, everything from tax scams to health scares, right, on COVID-19. So the reality is that targeted threats are on the rise. I talked about the threat last year of targeted ransom cases, and we started to see those, right, in environments where you're not dealing with a risk of having to pay $500 to get your data back, but rather critical business streams that go down, right, and having to pay in the ballpark of millions of dollars just to try to recover from these attacks. So there's that. There's the incident response recovery end, but there's also like, how do given your experience, T, I know that you have a lot of experience in consulting from a SOC security operations perspective, wearing a CISO hat. So I think it'd be good maybe just to talk about more of strategy this time, right? We know about the threat and we know it's real, but really, what can you do to start preparing against these, particularly since the risk is so high? There's more advanced evasion techniques, things like this, right?
Yeah, the landscape has kind of changed, like you said. So often, from the very beginning to where we are now. So that's always changing, but the constant, I think, I find myself actually repeating this over and over and over again, and I'm going back and I'm questioning myself, am I really saying the right thing? And, when I go back and I assess if I am or not, I still think I am. It's the foundational information that you're going to need to be able to start to build a cybersecurity program that's going to be able to respond to some of these actual threats that are continuously evolving over time. Some of those foundational, things would be like, I always say this, when I talk about this, it's just the tip of the iceberg, because you see the iceberg, but then when you look underneath the water, it's a lot more information and things that you got to do. So take all that with a grain of salt. So, some of the things I'm talking about, if I can simplify it a little bit, is one is being aware of your situation inside your environment, and also, externally. When I mean inside the environment, though, it's what are your assets? What are your operating systems? What are the applications on those operating systems? What are the actual processes, the services? Where's your data? How is your data actually flowing from system to system? When you start to understand some of those things, you get more of an actual baseline of some of the actual gaps that you're going to need, and you're going to have to be able to put in place to start, at least on that foundational level, be able to build upon that, right? So if you get that information, you're aware of what's happening in your environment, you now have the ability to understand what are some of the vulnerabilities that you may have in your environment, that may actually exist in your environment. You understand some of the actual avenues of approach the adversaries may be able to take. Now you can start putting in different choke points to be able to throttle them back when they are inside your network. So that's kind of the first step,
There's got to be some easy wins there too. So I think you're right. There's going to the iceberg analogy. We always, in the industry, we usually reference that to the mystery of deep web, right? It's that whole like everything on the public internet is searchable, but really there's this deep web underneath there, and where a lot of threats are lurking. But really, it's the same sort of analogy now that you're talking about it from, I guess, CISO perspective, where it's like just from a network for assets, digital assets on your network. Where are they? Where do they lie? Especially in large distributed enterprise, things like that too. I've consistently asked CISOs and CIOs in the past, if I were to ask you on any given day how many devices are connected to your network, would you know? And then the simple answer usually is no. They can give ballpark figures, but it's so volatile, right? And so I guess what I'm saying is it's sort of easier said than done sometimes. It's always been. I know you constantly talk about this, but it's, I guess, just naturally been a big challenge, right, in today's day and age with that larger attack surface. So I'm just, what do you think are some? You talked about the choke points. What are some easy wins there?
I think it's not, like you said, it's not super simple these days, right? You got kind of cloud, you got workloads that are spinning up and spinning down. You got IoT these days. So yeah, I totally agree. It's not easy, but if you look out there, there's a variety of different innovation and technology that makes it a lot easier than it was in the past. So I definitely will say that, right? I mean, so it's not as difficult as you may think. Just get some of those actual fundamental things down. I think you can get some kind of quick wins there. Like an example, maybe you focus on a good vulnerability and patch management system. Now, what I'm not saying is patch, because going back to what you said, that's easier said than done. But as long as you have that awareness of where those vulnerabilities exist, you can put mitigating controls around those things to mitigate the possible exploit of that actual vulnerability.
Yeah, for sure. I know, and that's security 101, what we talk about all the time, right? Don't click on those links, patch your systems. But in reality, I agree. Like, we have to understand that there is no silver bullet with that, but there are easy wins for, like you said, identifying those vulnerabilities, plugging them up. Like I always say, you can only protect against what you can see, right? But you have to have that visibility, I guess, first of all, right? So let's switch gears a little bit, because again, there is no perfect rosy world, as we know, but it's all about risk mitigation, visibility, like you're talking about. So what's the next step? I mean, it's at the top of that iceberg, right? You're saying it's good to have the visibility and try to prepare and basically cover your bases through things like patch management and that. What's the next? We always talk about the attack lifecycle, right? So like from an attacker's point of view, they always want to know what your weaknesses are, what those, running scans, using Showdown, things like that, and trying to see what your attack surface looks like, right? Obviously, the next step from that is breach and penetration, and that's where a lot of problems come into. This is where a lot of the dollars come in from recovery, obviously, right? If they do get past and breach your network, from a dollar perspective, the clock is ticking, right? I mean, there's research studies, we're just talking about this earlier in the week, that are saying, the average cost of a data breach is just south of $4 million US. And those threats are often lurking on networks, dwell time, sitting there a long time. So what's the next step forward from trying to increase, I guess, your efficiency or response to threats?
Yeah, so like I said, so that first simple thing was having that awareness, and then the second thing is acting on it. How do you act on an actual threat in your environment? Hopefully, you did the right things to be able to prepare for attack, where you're at least able to identify something that happened to actually get inside your network. And once you have that, being able to detect, now there's kind of two parts there. You have the analysis aspect, where now you're already behind in the game, right? If you're trying to race, the actual malware as it starts to spread in the environment, if you're actually like neck and neck, if you start the race at the same level, malware is probably going to beat you. But if you're a little bit, if you're starting here, you're a little bit farther ahead than the malware, you might have a better chance. And what I mean by that is automating that initial analysis. What we typically do is we'll have, some junior analysts go through and, Derek, this is like, okay, look at the hash. Is it a bad hash? What's the file reputation itself? Where are some of the actual code blocks? You're running this through Yara rules. You're running it through sandbox technology. Those are manual steps. Start thinking about how do you automate that? So when you get an alert, the alert isn't saying, hey, I found something here. Now you're on your own. You want to see that alert. Hey, I found something. I analyzed it. It's this. I took this action, I contained it, and oh yeah, by the way, I also remediated it, self-healing.
Yeah. I completely agree. We're always behind in the arms race. We always have. When I say we, I mean everybody except for the attackers, right?
Yeah.
Because they move without boundaries, obviously without restrictions, without what they think is not legal consequences, things like that. But yeah, I agree. I mean, we've had to do the same thing in FortiGuard Labs, obviously. Like you're saying, like we've from our perspective in FortiGuard Labs, we've had to be as nimble as possible and scale to the threat landscape. We have north of 235 people in FortiGuard Labs, from developers to analysts to threat hunters and researchers. But you can have 2,000 people and you're still not going to scale to that level. So we've had to go through those experiences, like you use the hash analysis, right, to really automate those day-to-day tasks, starting with automation, DevOps, orchestration, moving to more advanced things like machine learning and AI that we do on the back end. And I think that, yeah, you're absolutely right. From an IT perspective, starting with automation is key, because I think a typical life cycle to that, you have the example of an analyst who looks at a SIM. Hey, there's a log. What does this log mean?
Right.
Oh shoot, I have this security hole in my system. Let me go into the firewall and try to add a policy and block this. And by the time they do that, it's too late, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. So it's like, if you're able to extend your detection, automate your detection and analysis, on the response side, it's the same thing. If you have options to automate that, those response capabilities to whatever controls you ended up putting in place, hopefully in the preparation phase, you've kind of chosen the right security controls that allow you to do that. I think you're going to be starting, in the race of malware, you're going to be ahead of the game. And, oftentimes you're going to be able to at least be able to catch up to the malware, or you'll be able to win that race against the malware.
Yeah, definitely. And like I said, at that point in time, the clock's ticking, right? It really is. Like the longer that these threats stay on the system, the more damage they cause in terms of risk and dollars, right? When it comes to trying to mitigate these, right? And so this is the financial aspect of it too.
Yeah, it just seems like they're, what I do is that, man, the way that they can, once they establish that initial beachhead, kind of granted, there's the hands-on kind of keyboard, like we saw over the last a few years, with ransomware, where they methodically place the malicious payload, but a lot of it's automated. So it comes inside your network. If you don't understand the vulnerabilities that may exist in your environment, how fast can that stuff actually spread, say, through some SMB vulnerability, right? Crazy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Spreads like wildfire sometimes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And this gets into the concept. It's I love having these strategic talks, because like we said, it's not easy, but there are basics to cover. And there's so many topics we could go down into. I know that we don't have the time today, but I think in the future it'd be great to talk about things like blue team playbooks too, right? Because that's how you map that, pretty much how you wrap this all into a framework and a package, right? So it's like you said, there's tools out there to do that.
Yeah, that'd be great. And the other thing here before we go, I'd also say, when you are better prepared to deal with a security incident, at the end of the day, like you say, it's going to save you money if you're better prepared, but it's also going to save you even more from the consulting fees. I say this just from experience when, I've helped a lot of customers through crisis situations when a security incident or security breach, and the ones that went fairly quickly, that were super successful, they prepared right. They had the right logs. They had the right security controls. They had the right enforcement points. It just made it so much smoother. If they didn't, the thing drug on for quite some time and it got pretty expensive.
Yeah, absolutely. Proactive versus reactive, right? And I think, again, from a C-suite position or perspective, that having those bases covered really will help get a little bit of more sleep at night, right? I mean, it's like anything. It's like in the physical world, if you have a plan, should some disaster happen, you're going to be more prepared and not scrambling when it comes to it, right?
Absolutely.
All right, T, I think we're up on time. Thanks for joining me. It's great to see you again. Good discussions as always. Hopefully we can have another one of these, and hope you're staying safe. And it's great to see you. Great to see you again.
All right, sounds good. See you later.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.